I sincerely believe that Johnson & Johnson took my mother's life. We believed in the company and the product specifically. My mother was a true fan. It was a staple in our house and a necessary part of our hygienic routine.
This might be one of the worst examples of corporate greed that has ever happened. See, Johnson & Johnson only stopped selling their talc-based baby powder in 2022, but there's evidence that they knew as early as the 1960s that it was contaminated with asbestos, and the reason why we know this is horrifying. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down the evidence for this and the slimy way that Johnson & Johnson is trying to get out of taking accountability. See, recent class action lawsuits have forced the company to release internal documents which are worse than we could have predicted. This is especially true for a company that holds a position of trust in society and is the largest maker of healthcare products in the world with almost $90 billion of annual sales. But as part of these unsealed documents, a 1996 internal memo circulated to senior members of Johnson & Johnson about a scientific study that showed the talc in baby powder had no medicinal value and had directly caused 3 deaths in children. They therefore recommended that its use in children should be abandoned. But rather than acting on this, the team began internal experiments to try and figure out for themselves just how dangerous the talc was. As part of this, there were multiple positive Johnson & Johnson tests showing asbestos in talc in the early 1970s. That's to the point that in 1972, a professor's lab note finds incontrovertible asbestos in a sample of J&J's shower-to-shower talc, to the point that he's trying to figure out just how much is in it, not whether it's in there. Now, back then, we knew that asbestos was a carcinogen. In fact, a study by Doll and colleagues published in 1955 showed a 10 times increased risk of lung cancer from asbestos textile factory workers. This makes what Johnson & Johnson did next even more horrifying. They wanted to find out just how damaging their contaminated talc was compared to pure asbestos. And the reason why any type of asbestos is so dangerous is because their microscopic fibers are incredibly difficult for the body to break down, meaning that they can get stuck in your tissues, leading to chronic inflammation, scarring, and eventually cancer. But Johnson & Johnson didn't use just any type of asbestos in this experiment. They used chrysolite asbestos, which is generally recognized as the most dangerous form. So they hired Albert Kligman to experiment on majority black prisoners in Holmesburg prison, injecting them either with talc or pure asbestos under their skin, and monitored the responses. It caused scarring, burns, rashes, pustules, swelling, and even reportedly mental illness.
And then it went on to become more inhumane and more barbaric.
There can be no doubt this happened either, as Johnson & Johnson have responded saying that they regret the company's participation in the study, but that it did not violate research standards at the time. But wait a minute. Research ethics around the 1970s were largely guided by the Nuremberg Code. One core part of that is that research participants are free of coercion, but prison inmates are not considered free of coercion at all. So they knew their talc contained asbestos. They were trying to see just how damaging it was on black prisoners at a time when the link between asbestos and cancer was irrefutable, and still were selling it, even targeting black households on multiple occasions. That is all already unprecedented in nature, considering that they did this for over 50 years. But what was the FDA doing during all this time? I say that because it's the FDA's responsibility to protect public health from things like drugs, food, and cosmetics. Well, to be fair to them, they did act, but not quite in the way that we would expect. See, in 1972, the government called a meeting to review an FDA study that found asbestos in a chunk of products on store shelves, including their baby talc. But 5 members of Johnson & Johnson attended as industry lobbyists who pushed to keep the meeting a secret. The grounds were that it would cause great economic hardship for the companies involved if this information actually got out. They argued that the government's asbestos tests were faulty and guaranteed that their internal tests were negative. We know though that by this point there were already multiple internal tests that had come back positive, and this was more than 10 years after the prison experiments. The government then agrees to let Johnson & Johnson self-test, essentially giving them a free rein to use their own watered down testing methods. I need to stress though, there were already positive internal tests that they didn't disclose before that meeting. After that, their profits continued soaring, and all at the expense of real people. The first patient to act on suspicions of baby powder related effects was Darlene Coker. She had mesothelioma from known asbestos exposure and was running a massage school. Well, that's curious, because how would a massage school owner be exposed to asbestos? That's when she hired a personal injury lawyer named Hobson, who suspected the J&J baby powder and filed the first baby powder lawsuit against them back in 1999, at which point they fervently denied the claim or to hand over any internal documents, even more than 20 years after their internal tests had proven Darlene Coker right. She then sadly died in 2009 from her mesothelioma without the closure of knowing that she was correct. It didn't take long after that for the floodgates to open on Johnson & Johnson though, as in 2007 the first lawsuit against them was paid, and then in 2018 a major lawsuit on 22 women and their families ended up leading to a judge awarding $4.7 billion with a capital B to share between them. Court of Appeal ended up reducing this to just over $4 billion, but still leading to about $200 million in damages to each claimant. But there are at least 50,000 more cases just like them who are waiting for justice from J&J, with potential hundreds of billions in liability. Even for a company as large as them, that could mean that their business gets a taste of their own medicine and sees some serious hardship. Of course though, with thousands of lawyers and accountants on their side, they have come up with a creative strategy to delay all of this by making a subsidiary company for their baby powder. They then move that company to Texas and split it via something called a divisive merger. So one company gets all the good stuff, i.e. the profits of the baby powder, and a second company called Red River Talc gets all the lawsuits. They have then tried to file for bankruptcy on that company at least 3 times, which has been rejected by the local courts. During all of which time, the 50,000 claimants are reducing as their cancer diagnoses progress. It seems this strategy will just delay the inevitable, and Johnson & Johnson will still have to face the music, but at nowhere near the scale that they should. In 2024, they offered an $8.9 billion global settlement for talc-related litigation, which would be paid over 25 years. For context, that is low, as in just 1 year, like 2024, Johnson & Johnson made around $14 billion in net profit. An $8.9 billion settlement would also be 1,000 times lower per claimant than the 2018 ruling, and would absolve them of all future liability. That means no more claims even if new people come up that have talc-related cancer diagnoses. Scientifically, that is wild, as it can take between 10 and 50 years for cancer to form after exposure to asbestos, and their talc-related baby powder was just taken off the shelves 3 years ago. That means if you or anyone you know did use Johnson's baby talc regularly and developed ovarian cancer or lung cancer, then it's best to check to see if you can claim as soon as possible while you still can. For those that haven't been diagnosed, then symptoms of lung cancer can include unexplained weight loss, fatigue, persistent cough, and coughing up blood. For ovarian cancer, it's abdominal bloating, feeling full even after a small meal, frequent urination, and also unexplained weight loss and fatigue, although some of these symptoms are non-specific and could happen with other conditions more commonly as well. But the elephant in the room here is how we as a society can allow a company that has committed harm on such an industrial scale to continue operating and even avoid massive amounts of liability for their actions. If a person ended this many lives, we'd call them a serial killer, but a company does it, and we call it Monday. We also have a system to at least hold Johnson & Johnson accountable, but what about the FDA? How have they updated their protocols to make sure that this doesn't happen again after that 1972 meeting? They are yet to make any statements on the documents that show their involvement since the 70s, as they only made their findings public in 2019, 2 years after the first successful Johnson & Johnson claims. We need to live in a world where government agencies work for their people, not their lobbyists. Let us know, what do you think should happen?